After a month of relentless back-to-back deadlines, I decided I'd had enough. I needed a break before the New Year's rush set in. So I treated myself to a solo lunch at one of my own black pro-rated flagships. I was halfway through the new seasonal tasting menu when my best friend, Becca, sent me a link to a post on a local industry secrets forum. The caption alone made my stomach drop before I even opened the thread. Someone was mocking a guest for daring to walk into Lumina with a discounted voucher, sneering that the average check here runs $300 a head, and that people without the bank account for fine dining should stop tormenting the staff who had to serve them. The post bragged about how hard it had been to photograph the woman flatteringly, how she'd asked for a retake of an unflattering shot, how the poster had deliberately attached the ugliest possible photo with the caption, "Avoid this one, folks," so the internet could laugh along. A handful of commenters tried to push back, reminding the poster that a guest was a guest no matter the bill, that this kind of contempt was corrosive to the brand. But the original poster only doubled down, sneering that she'd treat someone like a human being the day they dropped $10,000 instead of 50, daring anyone offended to sue her with their non-existent money. The account belonged to a woman named Tiffany, and she wore her lead hostess title like a crown welded to her skull. Right now, she was leaning against the service station 20 feet from where I sat, scrolling her phone, occasionally flicking her eyes toward my table with a smirk of pure condescension, completely unaware that the broke girl she was mocking online was her employer. I looked down at my outfit, plain charcoal tee, dark denim, my hair scraped back into a messy knot, and understood exactly why she'd made that assumption. I hadn't dressed for the cameras. I am Rowan Montgomery, founder and CEO of Lumina Hospitality Group, and I'd come here disguised as an ordinary diner because our flagship's ratings had been in freefall for months, complaints about staff arrogance and shrinking portion quality piling up faster than PR could bury them. I'd authorized marketing to run a discounted signature experience vouchers, specifically so I could slip in unnoticed and see with my own eyes what my restaurant had become. I expected mediocre plating, maybe a rushed dessert. I did not expect to discover mid-appetizer that I had already gone viral as a punchline. Tiffany finished typing whatever venomous reply she was crafting, looking pleased with herself, then sauntered over and dropped a bottle of Evian onto my table hard enough to rattle the silverware, informing me flatly that this was my water. When I pointed out that the tasting menu specifically listed chilled San Pellegrino served with a lemon twist, she laughed in my face and told me that tableside service was reserved for the $400 chef's table, that my little discount voucher barely covered the cost of uncorking anything, and that if I didn't like it I was welcome to get a refund and drive to the McDonald's down the street since Lumina wasn't exactly hurting for business. When I asked, with a calm I did not feel, where my food was after 30 minutes of waiting, she told me the kitchen was slammed prioritizing high-value guests, and that my voucher meal would arrive whenever the chef found a spare second, promising with open contempt that I wouldn't starve in 10 minutes. I sat there absorbing every word, understanding that the rot inside my own company ran far deeper than a single bad hostess. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I finished the meal I was never properly served, tipped the busser who'd quietly apologized under his breath for things not being his fault, and walked out into the cold with my phone already dialing my chief operating officer, a man named Preston Vale who had been with me since the second location opened, who I trusted the way you trust a hand you've held for a decade. I told him what happened. I told him to pull every review, every internal complaint filed against Tiffany in the past year, every scheduling record, every camera angle from that dining room. What came back over the following 3 days should have been a straightforward story of one toxic employee poisoning a beloved brand. Instead, it became something far uglier, because buried in the metadata of that very forum post, in the account activity logs Preston's forensic contact traced through a favor at the hosting company, Tiffany's account had been posting anti-Lumina content on a rotating schedule for 6 months, always timed within hours of scheduled investor calls, always amplified by a cluster of accounts that, once cross-referenced, all originated from IP addresses tied to a single boutique hospitality consulting firm. That firm's biggest client was Halston Reeves, a rival restaurant group whose founder had tried, unsuccessfully, to acquire Lumina 3 years earlier at a lowball valuation, a bid I had rejected personally in a boardroom he never forgave me for walking away from. The plot twist detonated the moment Preston sent me the final document. Tiffany hadn't been hired off the street. She'd been placed. 6 months before that humiliating lunch, Halston Reeves had quietly funded a shell staffing agency that supplied experienced hospitality talent to several competitors, Lumina included, at below-market rates that made our HR department giddy about the savings. Tiffany was never loyal to Lumina for a single day of her employment. She was an operative, planted to manufacture precisely the kind of viral scandal that would tank guest confidence right before Lumina's board voted on a major refinancing round, a round that, if it collapsed under reputational pressure, would leave the company vulnerable to a hostile bailout at a fraction of its worth. Reeves wasn't trying to ruin my restaurant for spite. He was trying to buy it out from under me for pennies, using my own staff as the wrecking ball, and Tiffany's viral post was never really about a $50 voucher at all. It was a detonator. Time to go off 3 days before the board vote, engineered to spread exactly as far and as fast as it had. I sat with that truth for a long night, feeling something in my chest go cold and precise in a way it hadn't in years. Rage would have been the easy response, the expected one, the one Reeves was almost certainly counting on. Some public meltdown from the CEO that would only feed the narrative that Lumina's leadership was unstable and emotional and ripe for a takeover. I chose something else entirely. I told Preston to say nothing, to let the story keep circulating exactly as it was, to let Tiffany believe she'd gotten away clean, and to quietly, patiently begin building the case that would end this the right way. Over the next 10 days, while the internet continued mocking a woman they didn't realize was their own hospitality group's founder, my legal team assembled a paper trail linking the Shell staffing agency directly to Reeves' hospitality through banking records his own accountant had been sloppy enough to leave traceable. I authorized one more undercover visit, this time to a Reeves-owned property across town, where I discovered, almost too perfectly, that the general manager bragging to a table of investors about finally putting Lumina in its place was Reeves' own nephew, unable to resist gloating about a scheme he assumed no one outside his family would ever trace back to him. The board vote arrived on a Tuesday morning under gray skies that felt appropriately theatrical for what I had planned. Instead of walking in defensive and apologetic, prepared to explain away a scandal, I walked in with a folder that laid out, in exhaustive documented detail, exactly how a competitor had weaponized a planted employee to manufacture a fake public relations crisis. Time to tank our valuation before a scheduled refinancing vote. I watched 3 board members who had been quietly pressured by Reeves-aligned proxies to vote against the refinancing go pale as the evidence unfolded slide by slide. I watched Preston, steady as ever beside me, present the banking trail linking the staffing shell company directly to Halston Reeves' holding entity, the timestamps matching investor call schedules with a precision that could not be dismissed as coincidence. The refinancing passed unanimously. Within 48 hours, 2 of Lumina's largest institutional investors, furious at having nearly been maneuvered into devaluing an asset through manufactured scandal, quietly withdrew their remaining positions from Reeves' hospitality entirely. A defection that triggered a cascade of nervous exits from smaller investors who didn't want to be caught anywhere near a firm now under a formal securities inquiry for coordinated market manipulation. Tiffany, for her part, had no idea any of this was happening until the morning HR called her into a conference room she assumed was about a scheduling conflict. I chose to be there myself, still in the same charcoal tee and dark denim I'd worn to that lunch, and I watched the exact moment recognition hit her face, the color draining out of it in real time as she finally understood who I was and how long I had been quietly watching. She tried anger first, insisting she'd simply been having a bad shift, that the internet had blown one post out of proportion, but the moment Preston slid across the table a printed record of her staffing agency's payment history, the true depth of what she'd participated in became impossible to spin. She hadn't just insulted a guest for sport. She had knowingly, repeatedly, taken payments to sabotage the company that employed her, feeding a rival information about service failures, staff morale, even fabricating photos when reality wasn't damaging enough on its own. Her termination was immediate and, per the ironclad clause buried in her staffing contract, came with the forfeiture of every bonus and commission Reeves had promised her, money that, once his firm collapsed under regulatory scrutiny, no longer existed to collect anyway. She left that conference room the same way she'd once tossed a bottle of water onto my table, empty-handed and pretending not to care, except this time there was no smirk left to hide behind. The public reckoning, when it finally came, unfolded exactly the way I wanted it to. Not through some dramatic press conference, but through a single calm statement I released once the securities inquiry became public record, explaining plainly that the viral post mocking a guest at Lumina had, in fact, been part of a documented corporate sabotage campaign orchestrated by a competitor, and that the guest in question had been me, conducting an undercover audit of my own flagship. The internet, which had spent weeks laughing at a broke girl trying to play socialite, pivoted overnight into a frenzy of admiration for the CEO, who had quietly outmaneuvered an entire hostile takeover attempt using nothing but patience and a forensic paper trail. Reservations at Lumina tripled within a month. Job applications flooded in from hospitality workers who wanted to work somewhere that clearly protected its people and its integrity in equal measure, and I made sure every remaining employee understood, in writing, that no guest, discounted voucher or not, would ever again be treated as disposable inside walls that carried my name. But the story wasn't only a professional triumph, because somewhere in the middle of the investigation, in the quiet hours after depositions and board meetings, I had to sit with the harder truth that a company I'd built from nothing, one I had trusted enough to staff through an outside agency without asking enough questions, had nearly been stolen out from under me because I'd let my guard down during the very months I'd been too consumed with deadlines to notice the cracks forming. There was no easy, peaceful resolution to that particular ache. Preston and I spent long nights afterward rebuilding hiring protocols from scratch, personally vetting every staffing partner, because the version of me who once believed loyalty was simply assumed no longer existed. The Tiffany who mocked me over a bottle of water became, in the end, nothing more than a cautionary footnote in a much larger war I hadn't known I was fighting. And Reeves Hospitality, once a looming competitor I quietly respected even while distrusting, dissolved into bankruptcy proceedings within the year. Its founder facing personal liability for the manipulation scheme his own arrogance had made almost laughably easy to trace. I still think, sometimes, about that half-eaten tasting menu, about how close an entire empire came to being lost over a hostess's smirk and a rival's grudge, and about how strange it is that the moment I chose to sit quietly in cheap denim and absorb every ounce of contempt directed at me became the exact moment I gathered the evidence that would save everything I'd built. There was no romantic rescue in this story, no partner riding in to fix what was broken. There was only me, methodical and unflinching, turning humiliation into leverage and to justice, because the sweetest kind of triumph isn't loud or immediate, it's the quiet, permanent knowledge that the people who tried to erase you spent everything they had trying and still lost.